MLB.com had a New Year's prediction for every single team. What did they have for the Royals? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned in to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. It is officially January 1. It is officially 2025. I believe opening day is just under 3 months away, so still some time, but you have pitchers and catchers reporting next month. You'll have spring training beginning next month. Things are starting to creep up on us a little bit. But since it was the first day of January and the first day of 2025, MLB.com had put out a prediction for every single team out there, whether it be player related, it be team related, it be off-season deal related. And the Royals one, I think, sits pretty well with a lot of fans, even if they truly believe it or not. So long story short, the prediction that MLB.com had was that the Royals will win the American League Central. I think it goes without saying that that is the goal for this group, the regular season goal, that is. When they get to the postseason, the goal will be to win the World Series. But unlike last year, where it was just get your foot in the door, find a way into the postseason, I think the Royals will all be focused on ensuring that if they get to the postseason, they've made it a lot easier on themselves than they had it in 2024. Now, nobody was complaining in 2024 about how the Royals got in. You didn't care they had to go to Baltimore. You didn't care they had to go to New York. You were just happy that they were back in the postseason. But I think going into this year, and I remember doing an episode not long after the season concluded, that now the expectations change. You're not hoping to win. You're not having your fingers crossed and say, well, if everything goes right, we can maybe squeak into the postseason. The expectation and the goal going into 2025 is that you can win your division, you can be a top seed in the American League, and you can be the team representing the American League in the World Series. It is a very tall task. They are not going to be a favorite to be the American League representative in the World Series. They're not even the favorite to win their own division. But I did think it was intriguing as to why they picked the Royals as the team to be the champion in the American League Central. I think that even though there has been some frustration, maybe a little bit of anxiousness to the quietness the Royals have had so far in the offseason, really since the Jonathan India deal, you have been focused on the Royals being quiet and not really paying attention to what other teams in the Central are doing. And what's happening around the American League Central is not much. What the Royals are doing is very much lining up with what the rest of the teams are doing. They're not being as aggressive. You already take out one of those teams to be a top contender in the division, and that's the Chicago White Sox. Cleveland has subtracted from their team a year ago. They trade away Andres Jimenez. They do bring back Shane Bieber on a one-year deal. They trade away Josh Naylor. And that's just how Cleveland has done business for a long time. They're not going to extend a lot of guys unless their name is Jose Ramirez, whether it be a starting pitcher, a bullpen guy, or a position guy. They're going to be moving on from them and try to get value when they can. So the Royals are not going to be worrying about Josh Naylor anymore in that lineup, they're moving on from him. The Twins have been incredibly quiet in this offseason. And I would probably say that Detroit has been right where Kansas City is. And I still think Kansas City has done more this offseason than Detroit. However, I will stick with my prediction that the Tigers do make the biggest move among American League Central teams this offseason, because I think even if they don't land Alex Bregman because they got that connection with AJ Hinch and Bregman, I think they're going to pivot to Anthony Santander. So I believe the Tigers will make the big splash of the American League Central teams, but I do think the Royals still have plenty of time to make the moves they want to make. But in this piece, in these predictions, it brings up that the Royals have a lot of returning talent. A lot of the young guys that were unfamiliar about how to be on a winning ball club, which I do think matters, they now have that experience. They have postseason experience. They know what it takes for a full 162 game schedule and how you can be successful at the end of September. They've gone through the hardships. They've gone through the losing streaks. They've gotten hot at the right times. They've been in front of sold out crowds now, where that wasn't really a thing for the Royals over the last handful of years, really. Since 2017, the Royals didn't have very big crowds, and when they would play other teams, they weren't really playing in front of big crowds. Now they have all that experience, and you return a lot of the talent from a year ago. I think you would be naive in saying that everybody's going to have the same type of production, and we talked about that on Monday's episode. I don't believe that to be the case. You are going to have to prepare yourself for guys to have some regression. But where I feel better about how this team could improve really is the bullpen. It sounds crazy. And I did have some commenters say, well, what about this guy, adding him to the bullpen? And what about, this guy or trading for this guy? I hear you. And I do think that upgrading this bullpen a little bit still can be near the top of the list for the rest of the offseason. But where this bullpen was a year ago was banking on the likes of Will Smith, Nick Anderson, James MacArthur, and Chris Stratton, I would say. Now you are banking on Lucas Erceg, who can be a all-star caliber closer at the back end of your bullpen. You know what John Schreiber is now. That was rolling the dice a little bit last year because he wasn't coming off the greatest of years in Boston. Now you feel a little bit better about John Schreiber. I think you look at, guys like Angel Serpa. You look at guys like Sam Long. Those are more of dice rolls because are they the postseason version of themselves, or are they, the versions that didn't look too good during the middle portion of the season? And I think having that trust with the bullpen does put the Royals in that conversation of being a top team. I mean, if Minnesota runs it back with the same lineup, they're still going to be running into the same issues they had a year ago and what also plagued them the year before that, which was injuries. They're not a very durable group. Their rotation has not been very durable. Their bullpen, which I believe is lights out, it's not very durable. Cleveland has been subtracting, and Detroit hasn't made many moves to bolster that lineup, which I believe they desperately need to do. Now it's not like last year, or last offseason, I should say, where the Royals made these moves, and if you said, I think they're going to win the division, you looked a bit foolish. It was like you're just buying into them finally being aggressive. They've given us no track record that they can actually win baseball games. Now they have. They were a team that finished second in the American League Central. They got to the ALDS, and they're returning a lot of the talent from that team. And I do think that if Vinny Pasquantino did not go down right at the end of August going into September, they might have been closer to first place by the end of the year than they ended up being. I mean, they had to patch together the rest of that lineup because they lost Vinny Pasquantino, and then their bullpen didn't have Lucas Erceg for a little bit of time. So if they do make that middle of the order bat move and it ends up being an impact guy, I think you could make a very strong case that the prediction MLB.com had is going to be truthful come the end of September. I mean, you can make a case that pretty much every team in this division, other than the White Sox, can win it. And that's what makes this division fun. That's what makes this division exhilarating. And I believe what we saw in 2024 is going to be very similar to what we see in 2025. There are going to be the ups and downs of every one of those teams, other than the White Sox, and I still think the White Sox are going to be more of an improvement. So not all the teams are going to go 12-1 or 13-0 against the White Sox in 2025. But for the other four teams, there are going to be some months where they're really hot. There's going to be some months where they're very cold. But the Royals absolutely could be one of those teams that wins their division and puts themselves in a very good spot come October for a postseason run. But they still have to add to this team. They have to make sure that that bullpen continues to grow, is better than last year, because I believe last year there were 6, 7, 8 wins that were left on the table because of the bullpen. The bullpen cleans things up. You go from 86 and 76 to 90 and 72. That can be good enough to win you a division in 2025. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, should the Royals look into a reunion with guys like Tommy Pham and Paul DeJong? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways to pick up a W, where you can love betting on players which will score a touchdown or how many points each team will score. It is absolutely thrilling. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And for my pick, it'll be a backup game for the Kansas City Chiefs at Mile High in Denver to close out the regular season. But I think Noah Gray is going to have a big game. So I'll take an anytime touchdown for Noah Gray in that game against the Denver Broncos. Moving on to some more free agency talk. And as I mentioned on Monday, as I'm going to mention again, hopefully we're just a few days away or a few weeks away from a big move that this team can make. So we got some fresh blood to talk about instead of hypotheticals and should this work out or should they go after this guy. I'm ready to talk about a guy that actually is acquired by this baseball team. And I know that they have definitely preached patience. A lot of teams out there waiting to see how the market really falls in the month of January. Maybe this is the month where the Royals do strike a deal, but I'll hold true to my commitment that if we get to the first part of February and no move has been made since the Jonathan India deal, I'd be feeling a little bit more frustrated than I did, back in December. But I did want to address a couple of questions that were sent in on YouTube. I always want to make sure that listeners out there, commenters, they are heard and we incorporate them into some segment ideas, because when you're at this point in the offseason and it's been a bit of a drag, you need some segment ideas. So if you ever have one that you want to talk about, I would love to incorporate you guys into one of our episodes. And certainly in the month of January and in February, we'll be having more interviews, more one-on-one stuff, so we can bring you those features throughout the offseason. But even a very loyal follower, want to give him a shout out. Prepsley sent me over some very good data, some good coverage on AAA numbers and advanced numbers for some of the guys out there. So want to give him a hat tip, if you will, for sending me that type of stuff. And who knows, maybe next week we'll dive a little bit into that, because that was some great work that was done over by Prepsley, who also sends in some good questions on Mailbag Friday. But one of our commenters talked about a reunion with Tommy Pham and Paul DeJong, and if it would make sense for Kansas City to have that type of reunion. I'm going to start things off here with Paul DeJong. And I feel very confident that Paul DeJong has played his last game as a member of the Royals. It is nothing against Paul DeJong. It is nothing against what he did for the Royals in 2024. I think it is absolutely about fit. And as we saw toward the end of the year, the Paul DeJong that struggled in Chicago for the White Sox kind of started to show in Kansas City. It's why he wasn't able to play that much in the postseason. Yeah, I think they could have used him a bit more as a pinch hitter, especially in that series in New York where you got the short porch working a little bit. He had that type of power. But in terms of being a fit, I'm not sure it's there. And from what the Royals have said they're looking for, it doesn't really fit with Paul DeJong. At third base, I think they're going to have Michael Garcia as an option there. You also think about, Jonathan India and Michael Massey having to play other positions. They're also going to be at second base. I don't know where the role would be for Paul DeJong. And the strikeout number was always concerning to me. The low walk rate, the high strikeout numbers. I think you want a little bit better of a contact guy in a role position. Paul DeJong did have those big time home runs, showcased a little bit of that power that he had, but I don't think the Royals will be looking to him to come back as a bench bat. And I think that writing was on the wall in October when he couldn't get out there. I think it showed to me that he just wasn't going to be somebody that they were going to be bringing back for 2025. If it's a 1-year deal, and it wouldn't be the league minimum, I think it'd be more so of a $1 to $3 million type deal. If it works out in that way, I could see something where there's an injury in spring training. He's still available out there. And because of the familiarity, you bring in Paul DeJong to be your second baseman or your third baseman for the first month or two of the season. But in terms of having a locked in spot, I think for the entirety of 2025, I don't think so. I think somebody like a Chicago or like a Colorado, and I mean the Chicago White Sox, not the Chicago Cubs, the Colorado Rockies, maybe even the Athletics would make more so of a move so that at the trade deadline, they can do exactly what the White Sox did. You hope for 20-plus home runs by the deadline, and you can flip them for a prospect or two, depending on what that team needs. The Royals wanted a little bit more power off the bench. They got that with Paul DeJong. I think they want some defensive flexibility and a better contact guy, and it appears a left-handed hitter coming off the bench for that role position, and Paul DeJong being right-handed just doesn't really fit that. As for Tommy Pham, this one is far more interesting to me because as of right now, I'm not a fan of the Royals running the same outfield back that they have with MJ Melendez and Kyle Isbell and Hunter Renfroe. I don't think I would be on board with that in any sort of scenario. I don't think that outfield is good enough to even get back to 86 wins. There's just not enough production there. There's not enough durability. I love Kyle Isbell's defense, but to have the bat in there every single day, I don't think it screams a winning ball club. And for Tommy Pham, I imagine that Tommy Pham is going to want to play every single day wherever he is. And why I thought he was very smart with this past offseason, he got offers from teams other than the White Sox in free agency. He was waiting it out. He didn't sign a deal until, I think, wasn't it into the regular season? I actually believe that into the regular season, he was still out there and he was able to be signed by just about anybody. The White Sox made the move. He made a little bit of a showcase in the first couple months of the season, and then it was the Cardinals that made a move for him. They DFA him, Royals pick him up, and he was on the postseason team. And I think for a lot of Royals fans, you like Tommy Pham. Even though the numbers weren't very, very impressive, they were an upgrade over what they were getting at the leadoff position for a chunk of the season. But I do think Tommy Pham is going to want to be a starter wherever he goes. And it's not going to surprise me whatsoever if he does what he did last year. What I said about it being a smart move is because he went to the White Sox, who historically became the worst baseball team of all time, certainly in the modern era. And he knew that at the trade deadline, they were going to trade him. And who were they going to trade him to? A contender. The Cardinals ended up not being that true of a contender, but he found his way to Kansas City, got to be in the postseason. I could see him doing the same thing, where he signs with a team that isn't very good. He is going to be able to start every single day. He will be able to showcase himself once again. Then come trade deadline, he could go to somewhere like the Dodgers. He could go to the Yankees. He could go to the Royals again, and he could have a chance to go compete for a World Series. I think it's a brilliant marketing strategy for yourself of, hey, I'll sign a deal to go play on a bad baseball team, and they're going to trade me at the trade deadline because I'm nearing my age 40 season. I'm not going to sign a multiple year deal. And who knows, maybe a contender does give him a deal and they feel like he can play every single day. But I don't know if the Royals are that team. I don't think the Royals are going to go into 2025 expecting Tommy Pham to be their answer every single day in the lineup in left field or in right field. I do think if they were to bring him back, they would want it to be a little bit more of a decreased role. And I think Tommy Pham would be looking to be an everyday starter somewhere. And I believe some of the teams that aren't true contenders right now would be more inclined to give him a deal like that than a team that's expecting to win anywhere from 85 to 90 games next season. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, speaking of that bench bat, speaking of a role player, is this former Royal a good fit for Kansas City? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor in Gametime. Right now, you got the NFL playoffs that are coming up. NBA's in full swing, college basketball. You got the college football playoffs. There's a lot of big-time concerts that are showing up or popping up in Kansas City. So if you're thinking about going to any of those things, do so over at Gametime. Look for some good deals there, some cheap deals. Maybe you're going with a chunk of people. Maybe you're going by yourself, one other person. Gametime is going to have you covered. Turn on the notifications so that you know when some ticket prices are dropping, when your favorite bands are coming into town, when your favorite team is coming into town. And Gametime is going to be that app to take care of you. It's the app I use when buying tickets for just about anything. I looked ahead to the Royals schedule in 2025, bought some tickets for some road games, and you guessed that I did so over at Gametime. So here's what you need to do. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off from that first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is Gametime. We are going to continue talking about some questions that were left below on our YouTube video, our most previous video. And I did get this question, I think a few days ago, now that I think about it, but it involves Nicky Lopez. Is Nicky Lopez a guy the Royals should look into bringing back? And I do think that on the surface, when you first hear that question, no matter how you're listening, whether you're watching me on YouTube or you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you're going, no, I don't think the Royals need to bring back Nicky Lopez. He wasn't good in his final year in Kansas City. He wasn't very good for the White Sox. He's a light-handed hitting or a light-hitting, left-handed middle infield bat. Royals don't really need that. I mean, that feels like what they had with Adam Frazier. It feels like what they had with Garrett Hampson. And I do think there are maybe more negatives to Nicky Lopez's game than there are positives. But I have looked at it a little bit differently over the last few days or so. And yeah, I know that's kind of humorous to say that I'm talking about Nicky Lopez in a reunion. I've been thinking about that. Well, it's because this point of the offseason has been really quiet. We are starving for just about any sort of baseball news, and there hasn't been any smoke to Nicky Lopez coming back to Kansas City. But in speaking of looking for a left-handed bat that can play third base, that can play the middle infield, that is Nicky Lopez. I mean, he does fit that type of picture. He fits that type of narrative. So I wouldn't put it past J.J. McCole and the Royals looking at their bench bats and going, Nicky Lopez was well-liked here. He knows a lot of the guys that are still on the team. He got along with Bobby Witt Jr. great. You're not asking for him to play every single day. He would maybe play once or twice every 2 weeks, maybe just 1 week. If you're talking about once a week, he can play multiple positions. He can do it very well. That's another positive. And that's the difference between him and Adam Frazier. No, he could play second base and shortstop and third base very well. He also did play some outfield, I remember, in Atlanta when he got traded over from Kansas City. So to me, I think from a defensive standpoint, it would make sense. If you brought him in on a one-year deal or who knows, maybe it would be a minor league deal with a spring training invite, I wouldn't see any harm in that because I would only be looking at that specific role for the bench bat, really about the glove. I would only be focused on what they can do defensively. I know you would want to have some better offensive numbers, but I kind of liken it to what, Paul DeJong was, who we just talked about. at the very end of the seaon, which he didn't play at all. Paul DeJong was there to be a pinch hitter. He could run into one every once in a while, but I would almost look at it on the flip side for Nicky Lopez. You've got some good speed on the bases. He is great defensively, where if you needed to make that adjustment, right? Let's say, Jonathan India is playing third base and he's still kind of learning that position. It's early on in the year and you need to have some good defense over at third in the ninth inning in a road game. I would feel all right with Nicky Lopez being that guy. Offensively, not really digging it. But I also look at it this way. How many times last year did the Royals pinch hit somebody and it was maybe first and second and you needed somebody to get a bunt down and they couldn't get it down? Paul DeJong couldn't get bunts down, really. There were a couple of times that Robbie Grossman couldn't get bunts down. And you're going, why don't they play the small ball? Why can't they just move the runner over? I think Nicky Lopez would be that guy where if you did pinch hit him in a spot like that, I'd trust him to get the bunt down. There are just some little things there. I'm not impressed with the bat. I don't think the 312 OBP last year does enough for me. He doesn't walk a lot. He's a contact hitter. He has virtually no power. He can hit a little bit to all fields. I think he's more so of an opposite field hitter. He's got some decent speed. He can play defense. I mean, that is the intriguing part to it. And you've heard us talk about Josh Rojas before, and Josh Rojas certainly is a much bigger upgrade over an Adam Frazier and a Garrett Hampson than a Nicky Lopez is. But if Josh Rojas is wanting $6 million, $7 million, $8 million, maybe you stay away from that. And if you're just wondering about a bench bat, a role player, somebody you could use as a defensive replacement or as a pinch runner late in the game, I don't think it'd be a bad idea to look into a reunion with Nicky Lopez. I think there would be value there, and he'd be a fine piece to come off the bench. I think he would understand what Kansas City's trying to do. He would understand his role. He's got relationships with the coaching staff and guys on the team. All I'm saying is there could be some worse fits than Nicky Lopez out there. If they were just looking at him as a defensive replacement guy, somebody off the bench, I understand. If you're not an offensive threat, then why would you waste a roster spot on that? I think you could look into it as, hey, he plays multiple positions. He was an okay hitter average-wise last year. I think it was 241 with a 312 OBP. That was better than what Adam Frazier gave you last year, and maybe Nicky Lopez can be that guy for 2025. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off tomorrow, but back on Friday with another Mailbag Friday. So send in your questions on YouTube, or you can reach out to me on Twitter. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.